You're listening to Aging Today, the podcast where together we explore the options to aging on your terms.
When I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine. If I've been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
And welcome to Aging Today. We are the podcast where together we explore the many options to aging on your terms. You can find Aging Today at our 4 years of past programs on our website. All you got to do is go into www.agingtoday.us, or you can follow us on your favorite podcast channels such as Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcast, iHeart, and many others. There's one that I never even heard of, and it's called Spreaker. But there's many, many ways that you can, tune in to Aging Today, and you can go into our past programs as well as the featured one of today. Finally, I want to hear from all of you, our listeners. I know that I hear frequently from many of you, and you're reaching out and talking to us and asking questions, and then maybe you have an idea for a future show, and you've got a special guest that's an expert in their field. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are, your questions, and ideas for future shows. All you got to do to reach out to talk to your host, Mark Turnbull, is to contact me at mark@agingtoday.us. That is Mark with a K, mark@agingtoday.us. And I would love to hear from you, so continue to reach out and converse with us. Well, in the aging process, they say that there's one thing for certain, and that is death. And along with death comes grieving, the grieving process. And not just with death, but, we're going to learn that grieving happens even outside of death. And it's a very challenging topic to discuss and talk about. But our guest today, Katharine Esty, is a professional speaker. She's an author, and she's here to discuss grieving, good grief, how to have a healthy sorrow. Katharine, welcome to today's show.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. I'm really delighted to be with you and to be on your show, and especially delighted because I think the topic of grieving needs more attention. We need to shine a light on it because we've all been through some pretty traumatic things with the pandemic, and we need to think about how to move on and move beyond.
Yeah, and grieving comes in many shapes and sizes and different points of life, and it is often associated with death, but death can be, from a physical body perspective, but we experience death in other ways, in other arenas in our lives, are we not?
Yeah, I think that as I think about what this whole recent time period we've been through, we all knew when we lost someone with COVID, or whenever we lose somebody, we're aware that we need to grieve, we usually do grieve. But what strikes me and what I've seen in my observation of the passing scene, is that there's so many other ways that we've lost something during this recent 2 years, and that we don't know how to grieve. And those things, because some of us don't even identify them, we kind of think, oh, well, I'm okay, maybe a little fatigued. But when we don't grieve, when the things that losses happen to us and we don't pay attention to them, we do pay a price. it's like carrying around 500 pounds of extra weight, and we are not our happy selves. So I think it's critical we all learn more about how to grieve and what it is we need to grieve.
Yeah, before we do that, Dr. Esty, can we kind of step back a little bit and tell our listening audience a little bit about your background and how you got to this place where you became an expert in the grieving process, but you're not just an expert in that. There's a lot of different things that you're doing with aging, and as an author and a speaker, and on it goes.
Yeah, well, sure. And I think, like you, Mark, I've had a long and varied life. I mean, I myself am 87 years old, so I have a credibility of aging, and I, in most ways, have aged very well. But my background is I started out as a social worker and psychologist, and did that for a while, and then I was an entrepreneur, and I had my own business of a consulting firm that took me overseas to third world developing countries. But all the way, I'm interested in living well, and as a psychotherapist, a practicing psychotherapist, I was trying to help people make the most of their lives, and that led me kind of directly into thinking as I had myself aged. And, when I turned 80, I was in a kind of a funk. And I gradually came out of it as I decided I was going to learn more and find out who was aging well. And I did a lot of interviews to find out what were the secrets of aging well. So I'm also someone who's had a family. I'm now a widow. My husband died, but I had a 59-year-old marriage. I had 4 sons, and now I have 4 daughters-in-law and 12 grandchildren, and so I've got a big family, and I live in a retirement home. So I'm meeting and working with older people, and I'm right now. My real passion, is helping us all to age well, and that I believe there's so much that is positive, and I want to get the word out about aging well.
Well, and you've got the right platform, because that's what this show's about. This is about aging well and answering a lot of the questions that we have on aging. And I would imagine as you started to explore aging well, and you talk about the secrets to aging well, I'm sure there's more than one secret to the whole topic of aging well.
Sure, and I interviewed. I've written a book about people in their 80s, because I thought nobody knows what. When I got there, nobody was saying what it was like. They'd talk about old people or older people from 65 to 100, and I wanted to see, for that particular decade that I was in, I wanted to learn more. Yeah. And I wrote a book called EightySomethings. But in learning that and in doing a lot of interviews with elders, I found out that so many of them were doing wonderfully and were unexpectedly happy. So I was onto something of finding out more about that.
Yeah. And is there certain things that you're doing? Did you change your diet? Did you change your exercise routine? Did you maybe started exercising? I don't know. What were some of the things that you started doing differently?
Well, as I started realizing, first of all, that you didn't have to be depressed just because you were old, and that plenty of people were active. And I always had been active, but I think when I had some setbacks, my turning point was one day I was with my grandchildren and some of my sons, and was going to climb a mountain that I had climbed many, many times. It was just like a short 2-hour hike up the mountain. It wasn't big, but I found out that day I couldn't do it. I fell. I scraped my knee, and so to me, that's put me in the funk, because I always thought I can keep going. Look at me, I can do push-ups. I was very, but I think for me it was to come to terms with that I did have to let go of some things, and I learned how to do that. So that's one of the secrets you have to kind of let go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I do think exercise is important. But I think being connected to other people is critical. And I actually have a new partner, so I have a new boyfriend, which helped me get through the pandemic. So I think there's many, many things that so much of our aging is in our own control, but we have to understand that, and part of what we have to do that we may not know about is to do, some of the grieving for the things that we may have to give up along the way.
Yeah. And I think that, I love it when you say at the age of 87, I have a new boyfriend. That just like sends chills up and down my spine. And thank you for, living your life. I mean, you were with your first husband for, you said 56 years. And I'm sure that there's lots of memories and a lot of things, but that you probably went through the grieving process of letting that go, not forgetting, but letting it go and continuing to move forward in your life. And my hat is off to you.
Yeah, and that it was a long process, and that, of course, when he died, that set me into another funk, and I had to work my way through that. But even more recently, I had a beloved brother-in-law that died during the pandemic. That was my loss during the most recent 2 years, and that, unlike my husband, which we had a wonderful service for him, and all the family came, and we all hugged and told stories. When Peter, his brother, died, nobody could visit him, and they couldn't have a service, and so I think we've all been through a time now that we haven't been able to grieve appropriately. But and we just had the service for him, and he died last November, and we didn't have the service for my brother-in-law Peter until August. But finally, the family got together. So, but I think that there is a need when you do lose somebody to have a gathering and being with other people, and it makes it all so much easier.
Yeah, and I love your perspective too. From a lot of times we approach some of these topics academically, or we approach them from a distance, writing about them or talking about them when we're in our 40s, 50s, or 60s. But you're talking about it, you're writing about it, you're speaking on it in your 80s, and I think that brings a new perspective, a fresh perspective, and my compliments to you for opening yourself up to do that.
Right, I think because I have I've got really good credentials to write about aging, because a lot of people aren't, and I really am in the MA older, and it gives me, I'm writing from the inside out about aging well, so I know I'm going through it myself.
Yeah. You bring the professional experience, but also the personal experience, and combining those two is what a dynamic duo that is. So let's begin to talk a little bit about grief. What is grief from your perspective? And then let's talk about some of the different ways we as human beings experience our grief.
Yeah, well, I think grief is what is a way of processing our losses. So it starts with loss. And, the loss is, I've said in some of my writing that we all have losses in life. And one of the secrets to aging well is to being able to work through, to manage, to deal with, have a process for actually working through that loss and feeling it and then letting go. So that is what I think is really important. And what I've been thinking about in terms of the hidden kinds of grief, we all know when someone dies that we're going to need to grieve. But I think that so much has happened to us all in the last 2 years. For instance, myself, my story was that I lost, for a whole year and a half, I didn't see some of my sons, two of my sons and their families. I had Christmas and Thanksgiving without any family. In my retirement community, I was in a real lockdown for 12 weeks out, only 12, but where we couldn't go out of our apartment. Luckily, I had my new boyfriend and my new love, so I wasn't alone, but I felt, there were many people, older people that do live alone, and so they were, with the aging in place, or aging, staying in their homes was really a loss. So there's all that happened to us during the pandemic, but then there's also the kind of fear that we all had about getting this disease and COVID. And we're all living with so much uncertainty, and I think right now with the surging again, it's really another loss. We were just, I think, at least I was just ready to get out and play and have fun and was celebrating when suddenly it's not over, and so that's been another loss. So there are all these losses that we have and we have to deal with, and lots of times people just think, oh, I'm okay, and they sweep it under the rug. Mm-hmm. So, but as I said, they pay a price when they do that.
Yeah, what does social isolation do to us as we're going through the grieving process of our losses? And a lot of times that does lead to social isolation.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. We're all grieving. So, and social isolation, we found out is terrible for our health. That if you are living alone or isolated, that it's a huge increase in risk factors, like 30% increase in the risk of having a stroke or having a heart disease. And so I think many people are unaware of that, and it's also people with dementia, when they're isolated and don't have any contact with other people, they fail, they go downhill really rapidly. I saw that in my own retirement community here, that people that were okay before, when they were isolated in their apartments and couldn't really see other people, they paid a price for it. So I have a model of how to help people grieve, and I think that we all need to be much more conscious of the grieving process. And that today, I know you were at one point in your career, Mark, you were a pastor, and the church grief is one of the things they do well. They have ceremonies and so on. But most of our society now, so many people are not churchy anymore. Yeah. And so there's it's a secular society for a bunch of people. And the church doesn't really have the ceremonies or methods for these other kinds of grief, because the church doesn't say, well, yeah, I know you're socially isolated, so let's have a service to manage that. But so what I think is important, that in grieving is that the first step is really to acknowledge that there's been a loss, and what I'm telling my clients and people that in my world, that the first step is really to make a list of all the things that you've lost in the last 2 years. This is when I'm working with people around the pandemic and grieving the pandemic. And so people are just surprised. I usually go through my list, and I've given you some of it, but there's what I missed, but I also didn't travel, and I couldn't be with my partner when he had some surgery, and I had, my book groups didn't meet except on Zoom, and I didn't get to go to dinner with my friends. There's all these hundreds of kinds of losses that we've been living with, and I have been afraid. I was told even today that somebody it was a scary experience today. I was called about 3:00, and they said that there'd been somebody had come down with COVID, and that I had been in contact with them at a meeting, and so could I come down? And I'd got a rapid test. So within 15 minutes, I found out that I wasn't positive, but it was a jolt to my day and showed me, and I had to go through for those 15 minutes thinking, well, if I have COVID, what is it going to mean? And I was just about to go away on a lovely weekend and so on. So, but anyway, so the first step that I think all of us need to do is to kind of, for healthy aging, is to make a list of the things that we've lost in the last 2 years. That's the start.
And it doesn't matter how, sometimes we think of loss as death, but there's other types of losses that.
Right, and I think there's all those. That's exactly. It's so important that what you just said, Mark. That there's other types, and such as the being socially isolated is a huge loss, and being so uncertain. We've lived with so much uncertainty. That's a huge loss. We lost our sense of safety, and it's just so that I think we need to. So that the first step in grieving and managing grief and working it is just to acknowledge, that is a loss, and write it down, make a list. And then I suggest to people that the step 2, I have a 4-step process, and so that's the first step. And the second step is you kind of say we're socially isolated. But then we have to get to feelings, you have to think about it for a bit and then sort of figure out what do you feel, because our society, again, runs away from feelings. And so if we're thinking, say, let's just about, for all of us that were kind of in our homes for many months and didn't really go out to restaurants or events or all these, then we have to stop and think, well, how do I feel? What do I feel? And you have to kind of do some figuring out of what it is that you feel about that, and what did you miss, and were you lonely? Were you sad? And kind of locate what you feel.
Yeah, can you give us a more concrete example of that? Maybe in your community right there. Well,
I'll give you an example of one. I was supposed to go to one of my grandchildren's this June to her high school graduation, and then it turned out that because of where the virus was, and that I couldn't go, and so for me that was a loss, and I was feeling really bad about it, and I realized how bad I felt bad because it was like a chance to celebrate. I had to give it up, and I just let myself feel how disappointed I was.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't say, "Oh, I'm okay," and because I
cover it up.
Very stoical. I let myself feel the pain and feel bad and feel so disappointed and upset.
Yeah, but that's a skill that you've developed over 87 years to be able to do something like that, and most people aren't in touch with their feelings like that.
No, so
how do you do that? How do you do that if you're not that kind of a person?
Well, you have to kind of usually, as I usually tell my clients, let's just take 10 minutes and kind of take some time and sort of just think about what does it mean to you to not go to that graduation, or to be, locked up in your house for and never you didn't see your grandchildren for for 18 months. Many people have not seen their families. Kind of just explore what that was like for you, and it doesn't have to be. There's no perfect answer, but people can say, "Well, it stinks" or something like that. It doesn't have to be fancy language, but just getting, and then you can say, "Well, how does that feel like to you?" And then most people will say, "Well, I feel sad. And sometimes they feel angry. Beneath the feeling sad, then there's some anger. I feel resent. I resent that I can't go." And then you can feel. So it's usually a lot of feelings. Besides, there's sad, there's grief, there's anger, there's resentment. All of those.
Yeah, and I
so
think
well,
I was going to say, I think that it's what you just said there is identified what what the loss was. I mean, or what your feelings were, to identify, the emotion. That's the right word I'm looking for, is the emotion that you're feeling.
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. That's exactly right.
And name it. Name it.
Yeah, name it first, and then identify the emotion and name that when, sad, angry, upset, and then, but then we get to mourning, which is a real part of grieving. We have to, in human beings seem to need rituals and ceremonies or some concrete way to bring closure, and that's what in a funeral service or a memorial service, that it brings some closure. But for these other kinds of losses, like having just been socially isolated or having been lonely for a whole time, what do you do? And what I tell people and what I do myself is to take some time by myself and just to go over, what it is that I really missed. And for instance, my friends, I have a group of friends that we have dinner every 6 weeks or so. Well, we weren't able to have dinner for 2 years here. So what I do is think, well, what am I missing? And I realize how much I cared about them, and I kind of during the time that we couldn't have dinner together, I would talk to them on the phone more, sent them emails. We started having Zoom meetings, which we had never done before, and we kind of learned to translate our grief into some kind of way of kind of moving, taking action, and we were able to tell each other that we would have and acknowledge that we were missing each other. So but I've been also much struck by some Native American tribes that have ceremonies for managing the grief that could come from being being a veteran and coming back and having all these memories, just grieving with those memories.
Yeah.
And they have one recent article in the New York Times was talking about this drum ceremony where the drummers will drum when somebody is upset by coming back and by all that they've been through, and the drummers will kind of take for themselves, kind of wash the great grief away from the person that is upset, from the veteran, say, who has come back and is having a bad time, is depressed, is not feeling good, and they'll, with their drums, kind of take that, symbolically take the grief away from the other person and wash them away of it.
Yeah.
And
that kind of goes against the grain of our culture, is that we've turned into a culture of isolation, of individualism. That's maybe the downside to, not being engaged in, more public events or more communities, if you will. And, a lot of people, even inside of the communities, I was thinking, you live in a long-term care community of some sort, and yet you can be just as isolated there as if you were staying in your own home.
Right. Well, and especially when they said we couldn't leave the apartments. I mean, now it's better. Yeah, since June, things have been, people are out meeting, but all of us have forgotten how to talk to other people, really, in small talk. I mean, so many of us. It's true that, but I do believe that rituals help, and to have for instance, in our place, they now have a book where if somebody dies, you can write it's a memory book, and so everybody will put their memories in, and it's a symbolic thing to do, and that works well.
This is Aging Today with Mark Turnbull. Mark is talking with Dr. Katharine Esty, speaker and author, and today's discussion is about good grief, how to have a healthy sorrow. We'll pause here and pick up the conversation in just a moment.
Sometimes I'd like to smack old age right in the kisser. Ow.
Oh yeah, still got those moves.
I will be fabulous.
Comfort Care can help with as much or as little home care as you need. From medication reminders and meal prep to everyday chores and errands. Let us create your personalized care plan and find the perfect caregiver match so you can live your best life possible.
Call Comfort Care at 503-636-0417.
A Did You Know moment from Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn.
Depression in older adults is not uncommon, yet there are many unfounded myths about it. Let's dispel 3 of these, because believing them can delay or prevent timely treatment. Myth 1. Depression is just a normal part of aging. In reality, depression is an illness, not a normal part of growing older. Myth number 2. Depression in older adults looks just like depression in younger people. In reality, depression in elders can look quite different than in younger people. There might be a pervasive sadness, but it can also look a lot like dementia's confusion and memory loss. Myth number 3. Treatment for depression is mostly ineffective, so why bother? In reality, with prescription medication and/or counseling, depression in older adults usually gets better. Self-help measures such as regular exercise and exposure to bright daylight can complement these treatments, as well as prevent further depression. Should you worry about an older person who might have depression? The National Institute of Mental Health offers these recommendations. Encourage and support the person. Show patience and understanding. Help them keep track of appointments and weekly medications. Someone with depression may not be thinking clearly. Make sure they have transportation to medical appointments. Be a good listener. Talk to them. A conversation can make a difference. Engage them in activities such as going for a walk. Remind them their mood will lift over time with treatment. Never ignore comments about suicide. Take action right away. The caregivers of Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn can assist with keeping your loved one active and safe. Meaningful activities can bring joy and purpose back to those struggling with depression. Call Comfort Care to learn how their caregivers can help you or your loved ones live your best life possible. Call 503-636-0417.
And now more of our conversation with Mark Turnbull and his guest, Dr. Katharine Esty, as they discuss good grief, how to have a healthy sorrow, here on Aging Today.
Another thing I've done now, this is back on when I've lost a person, but it shows what you can do on your own. It's not a formal ceremony, but that when a friend of mine died, a person that I loved a lot, I still felt the need to grieve even after she had a service. And so I invited many of her friends that I knew and I was part of, and we all came to my house. The other people, I think there were about 10 of us, and we just spent an afternoon remembering Maggie. And it was it meant so much to all of us because we got to hear other people's stories and other people's thoughts, and we could cry, and then we could laugh, and we could. And I felt in a way that it brought me so much closure on that particular experience.
Yeah. And I think that maybe more of our long-term care communities can be providing some of those, the leadership in that, and making these events, possible on as needed.
Right. I think that's good. So I was telling you about the 4 steps of grieving in my model, which is the first step was naming the grief and making a list, and the second is we're thinking about identifying what your feelings and emotions are. The third is mourning, which might be crying, but lots of times it isn't crying, but it's more like needing a ritual or a ceremony or a way to bring some closure to it. It might be spending an hour by yourself just thinking about that, whatever it is. And then the last step in my model is that to think about how you're going to actually be different and what you're going to take from the loss. I mean, I think, like from being socially isolated, we've been all kind of locked away in our homes. What we can learn as we go out after this pandemic, we can learn what we do need, that relationships are incredibly important. It's kind of the most important thing in life. And we should perhaps be putting that as a higher priority, more important than our work or whatever, and that we kind of put even our friends, put them at a higher priority. So it's kind of making, it's learning from the grief, but also making meaning out of it and translating our grief into some way that we actually will incorporate the grief and be a different person in some small way.
Yeah, relationships are the key to life. We're created in the image of our Creator to have a relationship not only vertically with a higher power, whatever that means to you, but also on a horizontal level with our fellow human beings. That's how we're created. And I think one of the things that we can all learn through the grieving process